Hey guys, it's me. How you doing? Well, I debated, did I want to make this reflections video while it was fresh in my mind, or did I want to sleep on it? And I decided, well, I suppose I'll do it while it's fresh in my mind. I had a great time today. Finally, Sameoldji and I got to connect and play a solo session of the Veil. So we played a solo session of my character. We played a few sessions where he ran, Anthony and I through the Veil. And so it's my turn to be the game master. And so originally we were just going to do the 3 sessions that I was going to have, but schedules being schedules, we finally decided, well, let's do a slice of life solo session with Yorn, Sameoldji's character. And I'm glad that we did, because it really gave me an opportunity to take a look and see what his character was all about. And we discussed how are we going to do this. And at first, I'd like to say it was a real pleasure playing with G. That was a lot of fun. It's always a little bit challenging to do a solo session as a game master, because really there's just a dynamic between the two of you. It's always a little bit intimidating because you have like other players to fall back on for the dynamic. And oftentimes my MO as a game master is to kind of set the ball spinning and then let the players kick it around quite a bit before I give it another nudge. And here it was much more of a back and forth dynamic. So it went really, really smoothly and really, really well. So I enjoyed doing that. And what I wanted to find out, well, first of all, I want to see, like, how do these rules really work when I'm running the game? Because it's just a set of rules. It's different. It's got more stuff going on than your standard Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's got different stuff going on than what I'm used to. I've been able to really wrap my head around the agendas and the principles of PBTA games, because most of them just make plain old sense. It's just a matter of doing them in a more codified manner. But I also, his playbook is complex. It's not complex. It is difficult to figure out what the hell they're talking about in the writing sometimes, in terms of how you actually operate a seeker mechanically. All the things you have to do, and I'll get to that. But the other thing I want to find out about is, we've seen Yorn's character kind of in little drive-bys. We've had our session 0. We've talked about who these characters are, and G would have his character appear during our sessions. But he talked about the unified. He talked about his religion. But I want to see, what is this really like? So I decided, let's do this a little bit atypical. We decided, well, where are we going to start this thing? And finally, we're talking back and forth, and G said, well, why don't we start at this party, this event that this group has? And I thought he was going to be, more of a preacher with followers, but it turns out his concept was more like he's just one of the guys that's in this group that's now going out to preach. So he's way down on the strata of the unified, which is kind of odd, because the unified is all about being one. So I did things a little bit differently. I figured, instead of being the typical game master where, like, once we've decided where it's going to start, I'll start narrating what's going on, instead I decided, I'm going to let G tell me what's going on. So you completely start to narrate, I'll step back, and at some point I will jump in. And the other thing that we decided to do is one of Yorn's beliefs, because we were only able to use 2 beliefs today, because the third one is about Cadmus, which is somebody that he hasn't not yet encountered during the slice of life that we're doing, because we actually did a slice of life before he met Tess. So maybe a couple months before the actual game started. One of his beliefs is that the Veil is the ideal teaching platform, and he had to figure out how to use it. And as we were talking, we're thinking, well, why don't we go back to, like, when he discovered this, or he's talking to another member of his faith, and we can find out, like, exactly what is this conversation like? How did G, or Yorn rather, go down this path? And so that's what we did. But I did something a little bit unusual. And I go back to the confusing part in a second, but I decided to do something a little bit unusual, and I surprised G, because I didn't tell him that I was going to do this. But when we get to this point, finally, when there's this guy who I didn't even name, I let G name him. His name was Victor. Not that that's important. We got to this point where it's like, okay, now it's time to have a conversation with this guy. But I made him roll a link move and find out what his relationship with this guy was. And it turned out he actually, it was a little bit strained. And so you got to kind of narrate, why is this strained? And that's one of those, I had this happen a bunch of times in the game where moves are made, and there's a lot of questions that, or options that people can choose from at this point. And one of the things I noticed with this particular game is, as opposed to some of the other PBTA games I've played, this game constantly has you choosing from this list of options, which means, like, as a game master, you may have to constantly make stuff up. I found that to be a little bit cumbersome. Maybe that's something I need to get used to, but it was really neat to be able to just kind of kick it back to G and say, okay, well, you tell me. After a moment of racking my brain, you tell me why the relationship is strained. And he came up with something really great, and we moved on. But it is, I found constantly having to answer those questions to be a little bit probably artificial. Because there's moments as you're game mastering that you make stuff up. It kind of flows in a more organic fashion. The players do something, they say something. You have an idea of what this non-player character is like, and you sort of make some more stuff up. Here, often a move is made, the list comes up, and you're sometimes scrambling. What do I do? Another time that happened was in the sway move. In fact, we had a discussion about this. There was what happened was G rolled kind of a weak hit, and there were parts where he got what he wanted. He changed these people's minds and had them do what he wanted, but there were two things that they could choose from, that like he now owed them something or whatever. And sometimes in that heat of the moment, it's harder to make those things up, and it seems almost like you're forcing more than what would actually happen normally or organically. And so that was a point that was a little bit uncomfortable for me. We discussed about swaying a crowd and everything, and what I thought maybe the obligations he would have to this crowd might have been had I just been making up in the absence of some kind of rule or list of things. So choose one from column A and one from column B and all that sort of stuff. So that part was a little bit. It kind of stopped the normal or natural flow of being a game master every once in a while. I'm not knocking them, but there was that moment of like, geez, really feels a little bit artificial or stilted or whatever. Going back to what was the most confusing, because that's not confusing, that's just something that either I need to get better at or it's something that's just jarring, period, to a person like me. We had this moment where we're looking at the seeker sheet and the moves that he makes in the beginning, and there's all sorts of stuff about answers and enlightenment, and let's see what else. There's the whole bunch of different terms. That's you start out with, and it's really difficult. Insight is another one. Really difficult upon like 3 or 4 reads to figure out what the hell the procedure is to get these. And a lot of them are currencies, some of them are moves, but there's something that you do at the beginning of a game session. The seeker starts out with a default number of answers and of want and of enlightenment. And then, depending on some of the options he chooses on his list, things will be a little bit different, like little extras. But he also has to roll dice, find out how he did, find out if he has surplus or if he has want or if he has extra insight or enlightenment or whatever it is. There's 5 or 6 different terms. Actually, faith, surplus, want, this cred, enlightenment, the questions, the answers, it's a lot of terms. It's a lot of stuff, and the writing in this game did not really support figuring out just what the hell the procedure was. It took the two of us back and forth, prior to the game, even the day before the game, going back for, or maybe it was this morning, we're going like, well, how exactly does this work? And I remember we talked about it a few months ago, sort of put it on the back burner, but it took a long time to figure out just how this worked, and it felt like there should have been a flow chart in the book explaining, like, you do this and this and this and this, and it was just all over. Not only the playbook pages, but a couple pages down in the book and in the moves, and then there was other information scattered throughout the book. It started to feel like 2D20 Star Wars or Star Trek all of a sudden, and I kept on thinking about the what the hell's the name? Tech Noir. And I reviewed that game. I have yet to play it, but reading that book, that's probably one of the best written books I've ever seen in terms of being really recursive. The page count is bigger than what you would think it would be, but it goes to great lengths to explain to you through and some of these procedures, which are not intuitive for a person like me. How exactly do you do this? How exactly do you play this game? What are the procedures and protocols to get these particular things done? you know. And that game, I was just blown away by like how well it presented something that to me would have been a little bit confusing. And so in this game here, yeah, it was just, we were kind of on our own trying to figure out how this worked. I think we got it right. I think we did. So that was very, very confusing, and it's something that a bit disconcerting. On that note, you know, and the game session was fun. I mean, it was a hoot. We had a lot of fun. But another thing that happened that I noticed, and we talked about a little bit in our end of session. I actually ended the session because I thought G had to go right at 3 o'clock, and it was like 2:45 or whatnot. He said, no, we could still talk some more. So I had to open up another Hangout. So there's a second video where we kind of do the XP thing and then start to talk about, like, you know, some of our impressions. One of the things that happened for me was, you know, as a game master, there's several things I'm supposed to be looking at and pushing. And I'm not talking about the general like principles and agendas of Powered by the Apocalypse games. Those are pretty easy because most of those are things that I have done for years. But there are things with the Seeker playbook, and there's you know, with my playbook, the Apparatus playbook, there's similar things. But during this session, I should be pushing his beliefs, so I have to know what his beliefs are. He had 2 beliefs up on the table. You know, the third one involves Cadmus, who he hadn't met yet in the fiction. So I can push on these beliefs a little bit, and we actually did get a chance to challenge those a little bit. To interface, and one of them got into trouble. You know, that was pretty easy. You know, figuring out what those things were, and knowing where to push them. He also has tenets of his faith that I should be pushing against. Things like, you know, in his case, I must be peaceful, I must be dogmatic, and my faith focuses on morality. And the Seeker takes a -1 ongoing should he act, you know, contrary to those tenets of his faith until he's able to rectify it. I was able to push on that. That was pretty easy too, to keep in mind. So now, okay, I've got, you know, beliefs to push on, 3 different beliefs, in this case 2. I'm also going to push on the tenets of his faith. However, at the beginning of the session, what ends up happening is he gets to use part of his, one of his answers, I'm not sure if they call it an answer, to ask a question. And there's a question that is what he's seeking the answer for, and he chose, you know, who or what must I renounce, or should I renounce? And that was something that in the heat of everything that was going on in the session, all the various situations I put him in, as I'm pushing on his beliefs, as I'm pushing on the tenets of his faith, there really wasn't a real good time to explore or put things in the way for things for him perhaps to renounce. I was thinking about it, but this is another ball I had in the air all of a sudden as I'm juggling. And then there was another thing we had to have up in the air that he was supposed to be we were supposed to be thinking about, and I'm trying to remember what the hell it was at this particular point. It's going to come to me like probably after I end the video. But there was a fourth thing that I was supposed to be pushing on in terms of what he was. I wish I could remember what it was, but there's another mechanical thing. There's another question or thing that I was supposed to be kind of pushing on him. It felt like I had so many balls in the air that, like, he and I both forgot at some point, like, that we should have explored this or explored that, and at some point it felt like it was kind of it was pushing it a little bit. Like it was artificial is not the right word. It definitely felt artificial, but it felt like there was too much stuff that I needed to keep track of, where it had I constantly been thinking about those things all the time, that it would have it was being pulled in several different directions, and it was hard to like focus on the actual fiction, because we have to think, well, we have to resolve this one thing here. We're supposed to resolve this, right? There was something else he had to resolve, and now I'm mad because I can't remember what it was. But there's another thing we were supposed to resolve or keep in the back of our minds, like we need to come to some kind of resolution on this. And so that was another thing in terms of the game mechanics, or the things that we were supposed to be doing, which it became a little bit difficult. As far as narration went, there were some interesting things that happened, which I kind of let slide, because it was this slice of life. Which was very cool to see, like, who Yorn is, what the Unified actually is. It gave me a lot more insight into like how to proceed in terms of who Yorn and pushing against what the Unified is, and incorporating that into the fiction. There were some moments where G like narrated beyond that. Like after those sessions were over, like we got into a situation where I had him go around the corner and witness somebody beating the crap out of somebody else. And of course, I'm trying to push against his tenet of being passive or being peaceful, because we talked about the session beforehand that like he has his biggest bonus in the state of being angry, and he's a guy that's supposed to be peaceful, and part of his character deal is he's an angry guy that is trying to be enlightened, through his religion. So he doesn't want to be an angry guy, but that's his bent, that's his nature, that's where he's the most powerful, most effective. So I decided, well, let me push on this a little bit. And the scene itself was great, but there were these moments where G, like outside of the party, outside of narrating like what the Unified were, G's so good at this of filling in all the gaps and showing and not telling, that there were times that like he started to narrate like what he saw and all that sort of stuff, and I kind of let it slide because I knew it was what I was going to say anyway. He kind of figured out where I was going with stuff. There were other things about the environment that he kept narrating, and it was cool in this solo session, in this slice of life, because he's been the guy that's been narrating what the apps look like, the whole vibe and tone. Even though we came up with some stuff in session 0, it's stuff that I probably would not have wanted him to do, like, or wouldn't want him to do in the actual session with he and Anthony. Hey, what's going on, man? But in this solo session, I figured I'd let it slide. But that was kind of interesting. I kind of smiled to myself a little bit a few times, like, man, he's taking some liberties here, narrating what's going on. But I decided I'd roll with it. But that's something that, like, in the actual sessions itself, I think I'd prefer to have a little bit more traditional sort of narrative control, and then kick it back to you, like, okay, what do you see here? But for the solo session, it was kind of interesting, and I just kind of smiled because G is such a good narrator, and it gave, once again, it gave me more of a. It seemed to be kind of this neat little transition between the two game masters as we kind of passed the baton about narrating that part of the scene. Let's see what else really was interesting. It was neat to put him in a bunch of different situations. I had a little prepared, not things that were supposed to happen, but I would care NPCs' names, things that might be interesting to see how he reacted to them. And it was a slice of life. I figured, well, let's have a normal day for him in the apps. And he did a bunch of really creative stuff. He used a bunch of moves in a pretty interesting manner. He was able to handle this conflict with these three ruffians in a pretty entertaining fashion. He rolled really hot on the dice. We determined that he should probably keep that set of dice. There was only one time that he didn't roll really hot. Another thing about the Veil that's kind of a criticism, or something I've noticed, maybe not a criticism. In most Powered by the Apocalypse games that I've read, and the few that I've played, when you roll a strong hit, you get what you want. You get like usually a bunch of goodies. When you roll a 6 or less, you roll a miss. Things don't go the way you wanted. Sometimes it'll explain to you how things don't go. The Veil is silent about what happens on a 6. It's just you don't get what you want. The game master makes something up. I mean, it's not entirely silent because it's time for a GM move. However, the 7 to 9 range, the weak hit, in most of the Powered by the Apocalypse games that I've seen, including Apocalypse World, it's success with a complication. In the Veil, it is success with less goodies, but some goodies. Very, very seldom, if at all. I think there's a couple moves in here where there's sort of a complication. For the most part, the feel in the Veil with the moves has been, for the most times, you succeed with lots of goodies or you succeed with a few goodies. It's a very different feel than like something like Apocalypse World, or when we played Uncharted Worlds, where you succeed with complication. It seems like this game is very amped up for you to succeed all the time. It's like a constant birthday party. My bias is showing, but it's a very bizarre feel for me, where it's not even failing forward. It's just succeeding, but succeeding really well, or succeeding so pretty average. So that's just a thing that's kind of sneak in there that I've been thinking about a lot about this game. Other than that, it was a lot of fun to see how Yorn reacted in a bunch of situations. The session felt very, very natural. It was easy to slip in the next non-player character kind of scenario, because it just kind of all flowed very organically, and we were able to go from go through his typical day, or kind of an atypical day that day, but see how he reacted to various things, and I was able to push on some of his beliefs and get him to challenge, like, are there other things that you should be paying attention to besides your dogmatic faith? And it was interesting to see how he constantly reinforced his beliefs, and sometimes even to the point where they got into trouble. So I'm really interested in seeing how things go with Anthony and G together. It's kind of funny because they're both these angry or passionate, pissed off guys who are keeping this tight rein on themselves. I didn't realize how much Yorn was like that until we started talking about him and playing the game. It's very obvious that Cadmus is like that, but Yorn is this other guy that's really just kind of trying to keep the lid on the pressure cooker through his faith. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the two of them are now thrust together, and really, at this point, what I'm supposed to do, and which is very easy to do based on what's happened in the last 3 sessions, to kind of like turn the heat up. And we'll see if these two guys crack into being together. It was also really neat, to take all these ideas that G had given me in our MC session where we transferred the MC notes, and starting to try to insert some extra stuff. It was neat to kind of insert some stuff about the veil, what the veil actually really is, what's going on with the veil, and kind of insert it in the beginning in this kind of prequel. And have Yorn know some things or find some things out that the other characters simply haven't been exposed to. It also gave me a chance to kind of like introduce the character of Pavlov from Anonymous, who, oddly enough, despite how Anonymous is set up, seems to be somebody of some importance. So how could he possibly be involved with that? So it was kind of neat to just be able to throw in a bunch of little things. It was a very even though it was just one day, we were able to kind of like just throw in a bunch of nifty stuff there. But that's my basic impressions with mostly, takeaways were real easy to play with G, really smooth session in terms of just plain old roleplay. That was really, really easy. The book itself, in terms of explaining some of how the procedures are, and it's not the only place that this happens in the book. There's many places in this book I've noticed, the more I read it, where it's very opaque. You can take a long time and figure out exactly what the procedure is here, but I wish it was written like Tech Noir and had some kind of flow chart. Like, this is A to B to C. That's how you get there. You understand now? Because we're two smart guys, and we were back and forth figuring out how the hell do you do this. And then there's some parts in the procedure which feel a little clunky, and a part of it, I'm sure, is me, and just it's a different feel. But some of like how those questions are listed, the list of options where you're constantly having to answer questions over and over again, where it feels a little bit artificial. Like, there's no way this would have come up in the fiction, but now I have to. The parts where the weak hits don't feel like success with complication or success with threat, but they feel like, well, it's success. It's just not ginormous. Fireworks are going off success, and it's very heroic. Very, not even heroic. That's the wrong word, but just things are constantly going super well for these people, despite the fact that it's supposed to be dismal cyberpunk, or at least cyberpunk where you're asking these difficult questions. I think we had to insert a lot of the dismal or serious tone ourselves, because when you actually did a move, it was usually like, hooray, things were going great. So it almost seemed like the system fought the genre a little bit. Possible. But that was it. Those are kind of like my takeaways. So I enjoyed the session. I'm really looking forward to all of us playing together. And that's about it. I blathered just about enough. I think that's most of my impressions. Oh yeah, and that last thing, just recapping again what I said, where it felt like at some point I was juggling so many different things that I was supposed to be focusing on in terms of his character, in terms of his beliefs, in terms of the question he had to ask that time, in terms of the tenets of his faith, in terms of a bunch of we didn't resolve them all. I wish I could remember what the last one was. I'm sure G will remember, but it was we both forgot, because it was so many things that we were supposed to remember about that session, like what his character was supposed to be focusing on, and whatever. It seemed, once again, a little artificial, a little bit like it was stretching it a little bit thin. So, anyhow, that's my impressions, and I'm going to go to bed now. The end.